I have been 6 weeks in prison and left there many citizens equally as innocent as myself. But such is the justice of parties. They are all alike. And we might say to them, as to the adulteress, let those who are without reproach cast the first stone. After my deliverance, I retired to Marseille. The predominant opinion of that great town was changed. The defeat of the Jacobins had been celebrated with fanaticism. They railed as much against the victorious convention as against the vanquished Jacobins. The catastrophe of Quiberon, subject of ineffaceable shame to the English government of that period, if it be true that it abandoned its victims, and for the French government, which had the atrocious courage to immolate them, with or without capitulation, raised the public indignation. The royalists were equally skillful in appropriating to themselves the fruits of the heroism and the errors of the conventional party. The counter-revolutionary spirit was not calmed. I had no longer any employment, and I thought of retiring into the country when fresh political struggles decided otherwise. The victory of Prairial had completely dispelled the demagogical intoxication, the ideas of justice, of concord, of the division of power, of equilibrium, had replaced the fever of the conventional dictatorship. The enlightened patriots could make themselves heard, and the Constitution of the year 3 enabled us to make a giant step towards true Republican ideas. 2 legislative chambers and an executive directory of 5 members offered a pledge of stability. In the month of August, that new constitution, enlightened by the error of the Constituent Assembly, ordered that 2/3 of the 2 new chambers should be taken into its bosom. That law of the 13th Fructidor exasperated all those who were tired of the yoke of the convention. It cannot be denied that to restrain thus, to their own profit, the exercise of the right of election was making an attempt upon the sovereignty of the Pope. To be free from all reproach, the law should have been submitted to the same voting as the Constitution. It was what the convention did, and then its enemies had only to obtain the majority of the suffrage. For it is the universal voting which consecrates and which can alone consecrate a new power. If they recognize the sovereignty of the people, that fundamental maxim must unavoidably be acknowledged. The royalists, although opposed to that doctrine, neglected nothing to cause the decree of Fructidor to be rejected. They succeeded at Paris, but they failed in other places. Nearly the whole of the primary assemblies accepted the Constitution and the decree. The sections of Paris, misled by the royalists, dared to call to arms, notwithstanding the universal vote. The convention menace named Barras as chief of its defenders. Barras confided the command to General Bonaparte, who was still without employment, and the 15th Vendémiaire, October 1795, could not unfortunately assure the triumph of the Patriot Party, but at the price of the blood of too many Frenchmen. The Constitution of the year 3 was brought into activity, as well as the law of Fructidor. The General Bonaparte was promoted to the command of Paris, named Commissary of War. I departed for the capital to rejoin my brother. It will naturally be imagined how much I reflected at that moment upon what he had said to me at Antibes scarcely 2 months before. Have patience, in a little time I shall command Paris. Chapter 4, the Directory until the expedition to Egypt. And organizing the powers of force and the success of the Constitution depends upon the equilibrium. Reno. Directorial Constitution compared with the Constitution of 1791. Address of Raynal to the Assembly. Mirabeau, Raynal, and Napoleon. Corsica re-enters the French family. Benasco and Pavie Monsieur Thiers and Walter Scott, the inviolability of the Legislative Assembly, Joseph Bonaparte at Rome and at the Council of 500, opinion of Napoleon upon the executive power of 5 or 3 magistrates, expedition to Egypt, my election to the legislative body. I arrived in the great capital a few days after the opening of the legislative councils, which I entered 3 years after. I found my brother in high favor with the Directory. It was through his influence that I was appointed Commissary of War to the army of Moreau, which I joined after having remained a month at Paris. During this month's stay, I beheld everything on the bright side. French society beheld everything on the bright side, and its stored to the ideas of true liberty and public order appeared to me the more admirable when I compared them to the convulsions of Jacobinism and to the reaction of the royalism of the South, of which I had nearly become the victim. I assisted frequently at the sittings of the councils, which made me take a disgust to the functions that I had hitherto been happy to obtain. I would willingly have renounced them all, not to have been distant from the public tribunes, but I was obliged to depart from Munich, Brussels, and Holland, where I went in turn during the course of the year 1796 to execute an employment, ill or well, in which I occupied myself with much less ardor than in reading the political journals and pamphlets. I became a very decided partisan of the 2 chambers of the directorial government. Until that period, my sentiments had not kept pace with the prevailing opinion, but I then found it accorded with my own. Here at last, I said to myself, is a republic. The division of power is the guarantee of our liberty at the general quarters of the army. I was very fond of making speeches and frequently got into quarrels with the Jacobins or Royalists, but soon the glory of Napoleon, who had just terminated in a few days his first campaign of Italy, that wonderful glory covered me with its brilliancy. My chiefs paid me a great deal of attention, and they excused both my indolence in my administration and my eternal discussions. I obtained the friendship of the General-in-Chief Tilly, who commanded at Brussels, and that of the excellent General Eblé, commandant of the artillery at Malines, with whom I remained over a year. This last, above all, was an honest and sincere Republican, and agreed perfectly with me in my sentiments. We were strictly united in friendship. We thought the Republic was established by the new Constitution. The hatred with which it inspired the 2 extreme factions was its highest commendation.